throwaway for obvious reasons. So I, female, 33, am completely losing my mind over my father-in-law's weird stuff, and I honestly don't know if I'm overreacting or if something is seriously wrong here. My husband's family thinks I'm being dramatic, but this whole situation is getting really weird, and I feel like I'm the only one who sees it. Am I the idiot for not telling my husband about all the concerning stuff I've been noticing with his dad? Okay, so background first. My father-in-law Alfred, male, 69, has always been the absolute best during my 3 years of marriage to Matthew, male, 32. I'm talking the dream father-in-law, you know. He remembered my birthday before Matthew did half the time, helped us move into our current place without us even asking, and genuinely seemed excited that his son found someone he actually liked. Alfred worked construction his whole life and retired at 65 with a solid pension, and he's always taken pride in being smart with money, but not cheap about it, if that makes sense. My mother-in-law Susan, female, 67, handles all their finances since she was a bookkeeper for 30 years, so they had this really smooth system where everyone just did what they were good at. Sunday family dinners used to be completely normal, and honestly really nice. But then 8 months ago, Alfred started going on these absolutely bizarre rants about grocery stores messing with prices. At first, we all just rolled our eyes and changed the subject, because honestly it seemed like typical old person conspiracy stuff from watching too much news, right? Susan would joke about him solving the mystery of the missing soup cans, and everyone would laugh it off, except Alfred just kept bringing up these price theories every single week at dinner. And when people tried to change the subject, he'd somehow circle back to it like it was the most serious business in the world. Susan would try to joke it away, but he wouldn't laugh anymore. Just kept talking about grocery store conspiracies, like his actual life depended on proving this point. So the family started giving each other those awkward looks you give when someone won't drop a really weird topic. And literally every family gathering after that had Alfred somehow bringing up grocery stores screwing people over. Instead of dropping it though, this grocery thing got so much worse over the months. Alfred started taking a calculator and notebook to every single shopping trip, writing down prices and comparing them to what he paid the week before. Susan mentioned during a random phone call that grocery shopping now took forever because Alfred had to check every single price against his notes, mumbling about catching them in the act, while other shoppers just stared at them. Susan said it was getting worse every week, not better. Susan even started shopping alone sometimes to avoid the embarrassment, but then Alfred would get pissed off about it, and they'd have these fights at home over simple errands like buying milk, which is just not normal for them at all. But the thing that really freaked me out happened last week. I was at the same grocery store as my in-laws, and I ended up watching Alfred spend 45 minutes in the cereal aisle. He was loudly comparing prices in his notebook while blocking half the shelves, completely clueless about all the annoyed people waiting behind him. When this young store employee came over and asked if he needed help finding anything, Alfred went off on this whole speech about tracking price changes and pulled out this manila folder that was just stuffed with color-coded receipts as proof that the store was manipulating costs. The poor kid looked absolutely confused as Alfred started showing him these price comparisons and getting more animated about systematic price changes while waving receipts around. The employee just nodded and walked away because what do you even say to that? I stayed hidden behind the end cap display because I was too embarrassed to be seen, and Alfred just continued his price checking for another 20 minutes, completely oblivious to people sighing behind him. Then at checkout, oh my God. Alfred took pictures of his receipt and compared every single item to his notebook, holding up the entire line while checking if the store somehow ripped him off for 37 cents. Other customers were rolling their eyes and checking their phones, clearly annoyed, but too polite to say anything to an old guy who genuinely seemed to think he was busting some major criminal conspiracy. When a manager came over to try and speed things up, Alfred wouldn't budge until he finished his checking process. I was so embarrassed for him that I just bolted out of the store to avoid running into him. When I told Matthew about it later, he admitted Susan had been calling him constantly about Alfred's grocery obsession getting totally out of control, but nobody knew how to address it without making Alfred think they all thought he was losing his mind. Matthew said Alfred had always been really good with money, But this level of tracking and paranoia was completely new stuff that started out of nowhere. There's other weird stuff too, though. At our last family barbecue, I noticed Alfred making these random snarky comments that seemed aimed at nobody and everybody at the same time. He'd say stuff like, "People don't understand what a dollar's really worth," or "Some folks don't appreciate the sacrifices others make," but never directed at anyone specific. Just floating these comments out there like he was arguing with invisible people. Susan would look at him totally confused during these outbursts, clearly having no clue what triggered them. When someone mentioned restaurant prices being high, Alfred went off about people not understanding money. Things got really weird and uncomfortable, so people changed the subject. But later, when we talked about helping an elderly neighbor with yard work, Alfred made another comment about unappreciated sacrifices. When Susan asked who he was talking about, he just said, "Just in general," and went to grab another beer, leaving everyone confused. I also noticed Alfred's been leaving family gatherings early, claiming he's tired or has things to do around the house. Matthew mentioned that when he dropped by his parents' place without calling recently, Alfred seemed genuinely surprised and almost jumpy to see him, which isn't normal for a guy who used to love surprise family visits. At the last 3 family gatherings, Alfred kept checking his watch constantly and would start saying he was tired about an hour and a half in, even though events were still going strong. The family would try to convince him to stay longer, but he'd insist on leaving and seemed genuinely antsy to get out of there. But then things took this really weird turn when Susan called me directly. Susan sounded more worried than angry when she asked if I knew anything about cash that Alfred had been taking out every month, money she'd just discovered while doing their monthly budget. Susan explained she was too embarrassed to discuss money problems directly with Matthew, and since I'm decent with finances, she figured I might have some insights. She told me she was balancing their monthly budget and noticed the bank statement didn't match her notes. And when she looked closer, she found these regular cash withdrawals she didn't remember approving or even knowing about. When I asked when she first noticed them, Susan said she checked back through old statements and realized this had been happening for what looked like years, possibly decades, usually between 200 to 500s, always in cash. Susan admitted she felt stupid for not noticing sooner since she handles all their finances. Susan explained that the withdrawals were always small enough to blend into their regular expenses, and since Alfred handled the ATM runs, she never double-checked the cash portions of the statements until now. When Susan finally confronted Alfred about the mystery cash withdrawals, he claimed he'd been helping an old coworker from construction who was going through a messy divorce and was completely broke. Alfred said the guy was too proud to ask his own family for help, so Alfred had been secretly sending him money every month for basic necessities. He told Susan he kept it secret because he knew she'd worry about their retirement funds being used for someone else's problems. This explanation seemed to solve everything at first. Alfred's touchiness about money, the weird comments about sacrifices from feeling guilty, even the grocery store obsession as his way of proving he was still careful with money despite the secret spending. Susan felt huge relief finally understanding what was going on and called me back to explain the coworker situation. But here's the thing that's really bothering me. Alfred actually got weirder after supposedly coming clean, not better like you'd expect. He started making tons of phone calls, always taking them outside or in another room, talking in these quiet, urgent voices that didn't sound like casual conversations with an old friend. Matthew noticed this during our last few visits and said Alfred seemed more stressed out than before the confession, not less. During a normal weekend visit, Matthew watched Alfred answer the phone and immediately walk outside to take the call. When Matthew asked Susan who Alfred was talking to, she said she had no idea, but these mystery calls were happening every single day now. The phone rang again during that same visit, and Alfred looked genuinely stressed seeing the caller ID, took the call outside, and stayed out there for 20 minutes, coming back looking even more worked up than when he left. Susan also told me that even though Alfred supposedly came clean about the money, his sleep got way worse instead of better. She's been waking up to find him pacing around the house at 2 a.m., having long phone conversations that sound emotional and desperate, totally unlike his usual tough, confident personality. And then this week, Alfred made 2 really weird phone calls to me personally. He asked about my work schedule and if I was free for a quick private chat about something important. When I tried to get details about what he wanted to discuss, Alfred got all vague and said it could wait until after his 70th birthday party next weekend. The calls felt urgent but super awkward, like Alfred was trying to work up courage to ask for something specific, but couldn't quite say it out loud. He called Tuesday during work hours, asking if I was free to talk alone, and when I said yes, he seemed to chicken out and asked about my schedule for the rest of the week instead. I gave him several time options, but Alfred said maybe after his birthday would be better timing. He called again Thursday with the same kind of conversation, saying he needed advice from someone good with money and practical about these things. When I asked if it was urgent enough to discuss before the party, Alfred said it could wait but sounded genuinely stressed about having to wait longer. I haven't told Matthew about any of this stuff because I don't want to worry him unnecessarily, but honestly, I'm starting to think Alfred's co-worker story might not be the whole truth. Information to add. Just to clarify for people asking, yes, Matthew knows about the grocery store incident and Susan's concerns about the cash withdrawals. What he doesn't know about is Alfred's recent phone calls to me, or how much worse his actions have gotten since the confession. I'm trying to decide if bringing this up would help, or just create more family problems for no reason. For those asking about Alfred's health, there haven't been any obvious signs of medical issues. He's always been sharp mentally and physically healthy, which is why this sudden personality change is so concerning. Susan mentioned he had a routine checkup a few months ago, and everything came back normal, but that was before most of these actions started. Some people are suggesting this could be early dementia or something similar. Honestly, that's what's been worrying me too, but Alfred seems completely lucid about everything else, like he can discuss current events, remember details about work projects, help neighbors with complicated repairs. It's specifically the money and grocery stuff that seems obsessive and weird. The timing is what bothers me most. If Alfred has been helping this coworker for years like he claims, why did the grocery price obsession only start 8 months ago? And why would coming clean about the money situation make him more stressed and secretive instead of relieved? None of it really adds up when you think about it logically. To answer the question about whether I think Alfred might be having an affair or something, honestly, I have no idea what to think anymore. The secretive phone calls and late-night pacing definitely seem like he's hiding something major, but he's almost 70 and has been married to Susan for like 25 years. It just seems unlikely, but then again, who knows what people are capable of. Now for the first update. You were all right about Alfred hiding something way bigger than just helping a coworker. The whole thing exploded at his birthday dinner last night, and I'm still processing what the hell just happened. Okay, so the night before the party, Friday night, I was working late and saw a missed call from my father-in-law, but didn't think much of it because honestly, after all the weird grocery store stuff, I'd been kind of avoiding him. But then, I checked the voicemail on my drive home and, Jesus Christ. I literally had to pull over because Alfred was begging me for a $2,000 loan for medical bills he couldn't tell Susan about. I'm not even kidding. He went on about how he'd always liked me and knew I was smart with money, promising to pay me back within 6 months and practically begging me not to tell anyone, especially Matthew or Susan. His voice sounded really desperate, but it was confusing because nobody had mentioned him being sick recently, and the secrecy felt so wrong, especially since he'd supposedly already told Susan about helping his coworker friend with money every month. Something about the timing just didn't add up at all. I mean, if Alfred was already being honest about giving money to a friend, why would medical bills need to be such a huge secret, you know? I got home and played the voicemail for my husband Matthew. I quickly filled him in on the vague calls from earlier in the week that I'd been holding back on, explaining how this voicemail seemed like an escalation. We both realized nobody in the family had talked about Alfred having any health problems lately. Matthew said his dad looked totally fine at the last family gathering, and I pointed out how the timing didn't line up with the coworker story at all. Why would someone supposedly managing their finances well enough to help a friend every month suddenly need to secretly borrow money from their daughter-in-law? Matthew called Susan to casually ask if Alfred had mentioned any medical stuff, and Susan said no, then asked why Matthew was asking. Matthew made some excuse about just being generally worried about his parents' health, which honestly wasn't even a lie at this point. And both of us realized Alfred was telling completely different lies to different people in his life. So then comes Saturday night, Alfred's 70th birthday dinner with extended family and old friends. Everything seemed normal at first, but Alfred had been drinking more than usual from the start and making these increasingly nasty comments about people who don't appreciate what they have and make life harder than it needs to be. The comments felt aimed at someone specific, but also at nobody in particular, like Alfred was pissed off at everyone and no one all at the same time. Susan kept giving him these looks and quietly asking him to tone it down, but he'd snap back that some people need to hear the truth. I started realizing the comments seemed vaguely directed at me, but had no idea why Alfred would be upset with me. I mean, yesterday he was practically begging for my help, but then, oh my God. When the dinner conversation turned to marriage and relationships, with people talking about how lucky everyone was to find good partners, Alfred looked directly at Matthew and completely out of nowhere said that marrying me was the biggest mistake of his life. I didn't respond emotionally because honestly, the whole situation suddenly clicked for me. The contradiction was crazy. Alfred just called my marriage a mistake, but days before he told me he'd always liked me while practically begging for financial help. It also completely contradicted his story to Susan about helping a coworker, since why would he need to borrow money if his finances were supposedly under control? Without saying a single word, I excused myself to go to the bathroom. And here's where I probably should have handled things differently, but honestly, I forwarded Alfred's desperate voicemail to Susan with a simple message that just said, "I thought you should hear this." Then I calmly walked back to the table with a smile on my face and kept eating my dinner like absolutely nothing had happened. I watched Susan's reaction as she checked her phone and put in earbuds to listen to what I'd sent. Her face got whiter and whiter with every second of that voicemail, and by the time dessert arrived, Susan quietly announced she wasn't feeling well and needed to go home immediately. But before Susan left the restaurant, she told Alfred she was calling a divorce lawyer first thing in the morning, and that 25 years of marriage deserved better than whatever messed up game Alfred had been playing with their money and their trust. Then she just walked out, called her sister for a ride and everything. The rest of the dinner was incredibly awkward, with Alfred trying to act like nothing major had happened, while family members gradually made excuses to leave early. Matthew was furious with his father, but also completely confused about what I'd sent to his mother, since I hadn't had time to explain the voicemail situation yet. Alfred kept drinking and making more comments about people overreacting and not understanding the full picture, but nobody was engaging with him anymore. By the time we got to the car, Matthew was demanding to know what I'd sent to his mother that made her storm out and threaten divorce. I played the voicemail for Matthew right there in the restaurant parking lot, and he just sat there listening to his father's desperate voice, begging for money while claiming medical emergencies. Matthew realized this completely contradicted everything Alfred had told Susan about helping a coworker, and that Alfred was apparently lying to everyone in different ways. Matthew said he'd never seen his mother that angry in his entire life and that Susan isn't the type to threaten divorce unless something is seriously wrong. I honestly don't know how I feel about everything right now. Alfred's weird grocery stuff and defensive comments about money, and now this desperate begging followed by him being mean to me. I don't know what's going on, but something is really wrong. I keep thinking about how mad he seemed at everyone for no reason, like he's angry at us for something we don't even know about. I honestly don't know what happens next, but I'm pretty sure this coworker story is about to fall apart completely. Edit. For those asking if I feel bad about forwarding the voicemail, honestly no. Alfred put me in an impossible position by asking me to keep financial secrets from my husband and his family, then turned around and publicly humiliated me at his own birthday dinner. He made his own mess, and I just gave Susan the information she needed to make an informed decision about her marriage. If Alfred didn't want his lies exposed, maybe he shouldn't have been telling different lies to different people in the first place. Now for the second update. I woke up to about 1,000 messages asking for updates after my last post. Holy shit, you guys. Everything completely exploded, and I'm still trying to process what the actual hell just happened. So Sunday morning, I wake up to Matthew's phone ringing at like 7 a.m., which is never good news in our house. It's my mother-in-law Susan calling from her sister Janet's place, saying she couldn't sleep all night and needed to see every single financial record from the last 15 years immediately. She sounded really upset, Susan had apparently stayed at Janet's house overnight because she couldn't stand to be in the same house as my father-in-law after hearing that voicemail I forwarded. When Alfred showed up at Janet's place Sunday morning asking why his wife wouldn't come home, Susan played my forwarded voicemail for Janet and her husband so they could hear exactly what kind of man they'd been defending all these years. Matthew and I rushed over to Janet's house, and the mood in that room was really bad. Susan was sitting at Janet's kitchen table with bank statements spread out everywhere, and Alfred looked terrible. He kept trying to stick to his story about helping his coworker, but Susan cut him off and asked point blank why he needed to borrow money from me if his finances were supposedly fine enough to help someone else every month. Alfred started stammering about how the coworker needed extra help this month or something, and Susan told him to listen to how stupid he thought she was. Then she played the voicemail again, and hearing Alfred's desperate voice begging me for $2,000 for medical bills while he sat right there was really weird. Susan demanded access to all their bank records immediately and threatened to sue Alfred for financial fraud if he didn't cooperate. Alfred kept insisting there was nothing to hide, so Susan called their bank right there and added Janet as an authorized user so they could access everything online immediately. And that's when everything fell apart. Janet helped Susan go through their statements systematically, looking for those cash withdrawals Alfred had mentioned. But instead of random ATM withdrawals, they found regular payments to names and addresses Susan didn't recognize at all, like consistent monthly payments to the same places for years. Janet suggested looking up each address using online property records to see who actually lived there. I'm not even kidding. They discovered Alfred had been sending money to the same house for 15 years straight. 15 years. It turned out her guess about possibly decades was off, but 15 years was still way too long. Susan's face when she realized the scope of this. I've never seen someone look so betrayed and furious at the same time. She immediately called a private investigator. Janet's neighbor apparently works in that field, and by Monday afternoon, they had photos proving Alfred visits this house regularly, sometimes staying overnight. The woman's name is Lisa, and she has 2 teenage kids. The PI confirmed Alfred has been supporting all 3 of them this entire time. When Susan confronted Alfred with bank records, property information, and actual photographs of him at Lisa's house, he finally broke down and admitted everything, because honestly, what else could he do at that point? Apparently, Alfred has been supporting Lisa since she was pregnant with their first kid. That means Alfred was playing husband and father to a completely different family for most of his marriage to Susan. The helping a coworker story was total bullshit from day one. The grocery store price obsession finally made sense. Alfred was desperately trying to save pennies on groceries while secretly spending hundreds of dollars every month on his other family. All his weird comments about sacrifices and appreciation were Alfred feeling sorry for himself because he was juggling 2 families and feeling guilty about lying to everyone. Susan filed for divorce Wednesday. Just like that. Alfred is apparently crashing at some cheap motel and calling family members trying to convince them that Susan is overreacting to the whole situation. But the voicemail I forwarded made it impossible for Alfred to deny he'd been lying about absolutely everything. When relatives ask about why he was begging me for money while supposedly managing his finances responsibly, Alfred can't explain it. The family quickly realized Alfred was a much bigger liar than anyone had suspected, and most of them ended up taking Susan's side once they heard the full story. But wait, it gets worse. Susan's sister helped calculate the financial damage, and Alfred had probably stolen close to $100,000 over 15 years. $100,000. Money that was supposed to be for Susan's retirement and security. He'd been taking money from their retirement accounts, their emergency savings, and even their house equity line of credit to support his second family. His late-night phone calls were probably Lisa calling him upset about money or the kids needing something, which explained why Alfred always sounded stressed and desperate during those conversations Susan mentioned. Alfred has been desperately calling Matthew trying to explain that he fell into a bad situation and that Susan is being unreasonable about the whole thing. He claimed he was going to end things with Lisa anyway, so Susan should just forgive him and move on for the sake of their marriage. But Matthew pointed out that 15 years wasn't exactly falling into anything. It was deliberately choosing to lie and steal from Susan every single day for over a decade. Alfred tried calling me directly to apologize for the birthday dinner comment. Remember when he said marrying me was the biggest mistake of his life, claiming he was just stressed about his situation. I didn't answer and blocked his number. Most of the extended family stopped taking Alfred's calls after hearing about the second family and the stolen retirement money. And then Susan discovered even more lies as the divorce progressed. Alfred had been telling Lisa that Susan knew about their relationship and was okay with it. Obviously complete bullshit. He'd also been promising Lisa he would leave Susan someday and marry her properly, but never actually planned to follow through because he wanted to keep his retirement benefits and Social Security from his marriage to Susan. Lisa was apparently just as shocked as Susan to learn the truth about Alfred's double life, and she started cooperating with Susan's divorce lawyer to make sure Alfred couldn't hide any more assets. Get this. The grocery store manager where Alfred had been acting crazy actually called Susan to ask if everything was okay at home because Alfred's actions had been getting worse and other customers were complaining. Susan had to explain that they were getting divorced and Alfred was having some kind of breakdown, which was embarrassing but also helped her realize how much Alfred's lies had been affecting his mental state. As of right now, Alfred is still living at that motel and working part-time construction jobs to pay child support for Lisa's kids, while also paying alimony to Susan. His whole plan of maintaining two families without either one knowing had completely collapsed, and now he can't afford to properly support anyone. Matthew occasionally gets updates from relatives, but mostly the family has written Alfred off as someone who made his choices and has to live with the consequences. That birthday dinner comment about my marriage being a mistake turned out to be pure projection. Alfred was the one who'd made the biggest mistake of his life by lying to everyone who trusted him. I feel weirdly vindicated that my instincts about Alfred's actions were right, even though I never could have guessed the truth was this complicated and messed up. Like, grocery store price obsession leading to discovering a 15-year affair and stolen retirement money. You can't make this stuff up. Susan is doing better than expected, honestly. She's staying with Janet for now and says she feels more relieved than anything else. All those years of Alfred's weird mood swings and defensive comments finally make sense, and she's not crazy for thinking something was off. I keep thinking about how Alfred put me in that impossible position, begging for money while lying to everyone about everything, then had the nerve to publicly humiliate me at his own birthday party. The man was living a completely double life and somehow thought he could keep it going forever. The whole thing is just nuts. Absolutely nuts.